specific Canvas tool or feature. This live demonstration will be led by Gretchen Schaefer. All of our Zoom sessions today are being recorded to the cloud and will be available for repeated access tomorrow. During the first part of each of our Zoom sessions, if you have specific questions you'd like to ask, please do so in the chat. Other members of our team are here in the session and will assist you there. Or, if you'd prefer, after the live demonstration is over, we'll open it up to live questions at that time. Thank you, and at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Vigu.
Hello. So I'm going to share my screen. I think. Okay. There's somebody at my door. I'm so sorry. Oh, we're good. They left. Okay. Sorry. Did you hear that knock? All right. So we're going to talk about discussion boards, but do feel free if you have questions in the interim to just ask. And Gretchen, this is your area of expertise too. So anything that you think to add, please join right in as we go. So the outcomes that we're going to use for today's talk, we're going to talk about open-ended questions because those yes or no questions just sort of shut down conversation. We're going to talk about making sure that the questions feel relevant to the students, are aligned to the course outcomes, because if we can do that, we're sort of honoring the adult need to know why they're doing what they're doing. And we're going to want to talk a little bit about social and emotional factors that help with conversation. And then as Elaine said, we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts of physically building discussion boards. So the 4 uses that you typically see for discussion boards, and we won't spend a lot of time on this, are initially, they are usually used to sort of build community. So people tend to tell us a little bit about yourself. Probably we're past that point right now in the semester, but it doesn't hurt to have those conversations if they haven't happened so that people feel comfortable talking to one another in this new paradigm. Sometimes we use them for initial engagement with the content. In other words, the questions that are sort of going to drive the students into the material. And sometimes we use them, and most of the time, hopefully, we're using them for exploration of the content. And then sometimes wrapping back and finding ways to summarize because we know that that's best practice. So why do them? For most instructors, they can be a really great way to drive the students right into the materials. So if you set up a discussion question that forces the students to use the materials to think about an overarching concept for your current discussion, you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck. Also, if you're able to sort of turn back and respond to what they are coming up with, even if you call them by name, praise something that somebody said, you're probably going to be able to increase your participation. As far as grading them, making sure that the students feel like they're relevant, making sure that the students feel like it's worth the time, I would turn that back to the student initially, and I would say before you post, is the information accurate? Is the post that you're making relevant? Does the post in some way add to this conversation? And finally, was it written professionally? And then what I would do is I would flip around and I would score the students on those exact same things.
You mean, is this to say that like a freshman that's unused to this is going to treat it like social media and there can be a lot of garbage, so you've got to set the rules?
Yeah, so what I would do, that's a great question. I think we've already seen a little bit of that. I've gotten a couple emails, and the advice that I've given back, and tell me if this makes sense to you, is to set some boundaries. And so what I suggested was that they ask the class in a discussion post, hey, what do you think are the primary rules that we should abide by as a group while we talk? And what happened with both faculty members that did that was they got some good input from the students, and then they agreed to a set of norms. And so far, so good. Not that freshmen are, you are exactly right. They tend to slip back, and as time goes on, they're probably going to slip back more into their usual kind of social media kind of conversation. Does that seem doable, Jeff?
Yeah, that I haven't done this yet, but that totally makes sense to me. And that's exactly one of the modules in AQ anyway related to class discussion. So that totally makes sense to me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the things that I do too is in my discussion boards, I set up, I don't put it out to the class, I haven't in the past, but I'll say, you know, it's fine to use abbreviations like, you know, FWIW for what it's worth, or things like that, but not to use numbers for two. So I kind of put in some examples of, you can abbreviate and use you know, use it like that, but you can still have punctuation and still be professional, but that in my own, and this is for my class, which could be different for another, but I'm not looking for a formal paper in each discussion post, but not so casual that it would be unreadable to other people.
Do you have, so that sounds like register, like you want them to be at the casual register, but you also want it to be productive. Do you have a set of sort of expectations that you've used in the past, Gretchen?
It is in my ED 307 class. It's under my netiquette expectations and the communication expectations. And so I put that out there to start, and it works out pretty well, just because a lot of it is sharing a resource. Like an example of a discussion post that I do is share what's the last thing you used YouTube to learn for learning how to do something, and they'll share a video, and then there'll be a back and forth conversation and say, oh, I've used that same video to learn how to bake bread or whatever. So I look for their journal articles and peer-reviewed resources and other projects. I don't do it in the discussion boards because it's really more about tying what we're learning to their own life, but that's in my class and will be different in other classes.
Yeah. Maybe we can put our heads together and tuck something into the back of this PowerPoint that could go to everybody that would have some sort of down to earth netiquette guidelines. Do that afterwards. Okay, thank you, everybody. So the cognitive piece for this, or the research says that great discussion boards communicate regarding learning outcomes. And it is a little bit of an extra, and it does take time to tie your question back to the learning outcomes. But if you can, I think it's a great way to make the work that they're doing for you in that moment feel relevant. And it also encourages professionalism. Again, always ask open-ended questions. Those yes or no questions tend to sort of shut down conversation. It's a great place to provide direction, direct people to resources, remind them of the course materials that you've provided. And then near the end, research tells us that the best use of them is to sort of sum up. And I've heard other people say this exact thing this morning, but you want to kind of go in and you want to have looked at them. And yep, you want to be careful that as the instructor that you don't at some point in the middle of the discussion come in and shut it down because you've given the alpha answer, but at the same time going in and encouraging and clearing up misconceptions, or maybe celebrating unique responses that really added to the conversation, because that will be hard for especially the newer students to the discussion board paradigm, thinking about how to do that. Gretchen, were you going to say something? Oh, okay. All right. So the other piece is sort of summing everything up and synthesizing what everyone has come up with for the week. It's a great way to just sort of wrap up that conversation and ramp them up for the next one. So a couple people have asked about open-ended questions. What do those look like? Can you give me some examples? I didn't pull examples from people's canvases, but what I did do was I went out and I found a list from Davis and Frederick, and they recommend challenge questions. I'm not going to go down through all of these right now, but one of the, I got caught up reading what they were writing about, and it was interesting to me to see that they said that questions that force students to, so if you already know, so let me back that up. If you already know what the misconceptions are that your students are going to be coming with, or the assumptions that students typically make, if you can use the discussion board to sort of shift that thinking, that's a really powerful way to use the discussion board, but also to help students sort of articulate what it is that they're thinking and why they might need to make a shift in that thinking. And asking questions that ask them to make shifts in their thinking can be really powerful. Action questions, hypothetical questions, extension questions. So we've already talked about sort of driving students into the materials with the discussion board question, but just asking a question that they have to go in and find the answer to probably isn't going to make the most productive discussion. But what it will do is if you can ask them to extend on what the book says. So having read page 453, what would you do next? Those kind of questions, hypothetical questions, questions that ask students to prioritize. What would you do with a patient here? What would your first step be? What would your second step be? As far as social and emotional factors go, again, especially in this paradigm, we can't demonstrate relevance or alignment enough. If you explain to the student why they're doing that discussion, that particular discussion for this class will give you opportunity to practice a skill you're going to use in the real world. That will enhance students' desire to participate. And then, you know, encouraging participation by responding and modeling yourself how to respond respectfully, but also maintaining ground rules. And maybe going back to the norms that you set and saying, hey, on the norms that we set for conversation, this one maybe doesn't look as much like it's following what we've agreed as a group that we want to hold for standards. The other piece is to, if you can, throw in that word substantive and explain what substantive means. Don't say just say you like something when you give a response. Tell me why you like it. Use evidence from the text or from real life. Expecting those and holding the students to that standard will make the conversation more fruitful. So I was thinking that we might use the tail end of our time to sort of talk about some frequently like things that come up, things that we know can be roadblocks to great discussion. But I think before we do that, I should turn this over to Gretchen and let her talk about the nuts and bolts. And then maybe we can come back if there's time or interest to dealing with some of the, you know, common pitfalls that we see with discussions. Does that make sense to everybody? So I'll stop sharing.
And I will start. Hold on just a second. So I put this in the chat, but just since we were talking about netiquette, these are some examples of netiquette that I use in my course. And this is, just to go back, this is how my little blurb I put about how casual or not casual you can be in your class. So that's included, and I put that in the chat as well. So what I want to do is to talk about how to set up a discussion. And before I get too deep into it, I want to talk first about group discussions, because I think this is where people get really turned around and where things can get challenging for both students and for faculty. So if you post, this discussion here is posted, this class doesn't have any students because it's a demo class, and says this is a graded discussion. I'll show you how to set that up. If it was a group discussion, you would see the multiple groups listed. Every time you post a discussion, it goes to your whole class, and that's great. And it can be great for like an introductory thread or something like that. But when you get into talking about, you know, if you're putting out prompts and doing responses, one thing that can happen in a class that's really more than 10 people is that it will start to feel like everybody has already said what you wanted to say. And the person who comes in as number 9 out of a class of 10 might feel like they don't have much to add to the discussion. So I always recommend breaking it down and having groups of no more than 6 to 8 people in each group. And you do that using people. And you can reshuffle your groups throughout the semester. So I usually do, actually, I don't want to show student names. So I'm not going to do that, but I'll usually do like discussion groups A, like for the first half of the semester, and a second step for the second half of the semester. And you do this in groups, and you do a group set. And this is the kind of thing that I can help you do, because this does confuse people. We'll have some more information for you. But when you do groups, you do a group set, and it might be discussions, and then you put your groups in there. So a common misconception is to add a group set and add group A, group B, group C using group set and not including all students. It can get a little messy. But when you do a group set, it gives you the option to break it up, and you can do it randomly. You can do it with, assigned. If you say, oh, this group is a project group that's working together. Go ahead, Liz.
Gretchen, I just have a question. Is it possible to also set it so that they can't see each other's responses until they themselves have posted?
Yep, I'll get to that. I wanted to start with the group piece just because, just to talk about why you would use a group discussion. And what will happen is that as the instructor, you might see similar responses. Like, so one of the discussion prompts I might use is find a resource on assistive technology and explain how you might use this in the classroom. And so I might see the same resource in each of my groups, but the students in the group all have to find their own resource. So I might see the same things across groups, but the student that comes in as number 22 out of 25 isn't like, well, great, now I've got to really dig and find something, and I don't know if this is worth it to look for a resource. So using groups helps break it in to smaller chunks. The students, I think, find it more authentic to have a small group conversation, and the faculty you will see, there's a big truck, a bus outside the office here. The faculty, you will see some of the same things repeated. So remember that it's like sitting a physical classroom up into pods and having them discuss it. They're going to find some of the same resources, but we want them to discuss why they're valuable. So that's the idea with groups. So when you get to discussions, pinned discussions, in this class there isn't a pinned discussion. This is the kind of thing where you might want to have a discussion that is general Q&A, or if you have a question about the class, ask it here and have the other students respond to it. So pinned discussions are always at the top. Otherwise, the discussions will be organized by last activity. So the ones with the most recent posts are at the top. So I'm going to add a discussion, and I'll show you how to pin one. So if I click on plus discussion, here is my topic title, Q&A. So you have a question. Oops, my typing is not keeping up because I can put that in here. And this looks familiar if you watch any of our other series. I can also add something like if I want somebody to please read this article and respond, and I'll below with your thoughts. That's sort of open-ended. I can go to files and I can plug in the PDF and the article is right there. I can also put in a YouTube video. If it's watch this YouTube video and what do you notice and what would you change about this classroom scenario or something like that. So I can put the text in here, and then here are the options for your post. So allow threaded replies is one that I like to recommend because it makes it clear who the respondent is responding to. And threaded replies are what you see if you're on Facebook. And so you post a picture and 5 people comment, oh, what a cute cat. And then somebody responds to one of the commenters. That's a threaded reply. So you can see clearly who's responding to who. So I always like that. Users must post before seeing replies. This is what Liz was talking about. And this allows you to put the post up and students will post without feeling that pressure of what the other posts are already saying. And they get a sort of they all look like they're the first poster, and that can be helpful to help them understand what they're doing in there. Don't even worry about enable podcast feed. It's for audio and it would make it a public podcast and you probably don't want to do that. Graded. The difference here, before I click on graded, there's graded and there's add to student to do. When you make it graded, It removes the add student to do because it's going to look for a due date. If you don't do graded and add student to do, it'll give you the option to put it just on their calendar without a grade. So I'm going to do graded, and allow liking is like Facebook. You can like a post. So if somebody says, oh, this is a great cat video, you can just click the thumbs up and get a like in there. So I'll do that too. Only graders can like. You can do that if you want. Those are things I really don't mess with. This is where the group discussion comes in. And so this is when you would create your group sets. This is the kind of thing that please let me know and I can help you get your group sorted, or I can review your discussion settings before you post it to make sure that your groups are set up the way you want, but we'll have more resources on groups. And then this is what the grade is. So I'm going to say it's worth 10 points. I'm going to display it as points, but I do have those options just like any other assignment. I'm going to put it in the assignment group, discussion board responses. I'm not going to require peer reviews on this one. I'm not going to get into that. And I'm going to say it's due on April 3rd. So with the due dates, the available from and until would be that it's locked before and locked after. So if I said it's locked on April 3rd, no one could respond to it afterwards. That's up to you if you want to do that. The add is to add if you needed separate due dates for separate sections. So if you're teaching a class that has 3 separate sections and you want to have them have different due dates, you can have a separate due date for that. And then you can click on save and publish. Oh, whoops, I'm not going to do a group one for here. Save and publish. And then the discussion board is live. Now, if I want to make this Q&A a pinned discussion, all I need to do is drag it up here, and now this will always be at the top. And then the rest are going to be shuffled by the most recent activity. This example here is an unpublished discussion, so it's one that's set up but that hasn't been released to students yet. And if I had closed it on April 3rd so that you couldn't make any more comments, it would drift down here to be closed for comments. So always at the top, sorted in order of most recent, and closed and locked end up down here. So that's how they get sorted through. Any questions?
What's been your experience on the read or don't read for students? You can read other students on that setting.
I think it's one of the ones that I use it on actually is when I do my introductory thread for students, because I require them to do a video introduction, and I think it helps them to, you know how you go around a room and you introduce people and the first person that introduces is what the tone is. So if the first person introduces himself in a group setting and says, oh, I'm Gretchen Schaefer, I'm from Husson. Everyone goes around and says, oh, I'm Liz Vignew, I'm from Husson. I'm Elaine Bartley, I'm from UMaine. If the first person says, oh, I'm Gretchen Schaefer, I live in Bangor, I teach at Husson, I have 2 kids and a cat, 2 cats, then the next person gives that much information. So I think that one of the things is that if you make it users can't see before replying, that it doesn't have the first person set the tone and the pace for the whole discussion, that everybody's kind of giving their own thought, and it can help see a variety in your responses. One of my rules when I talk to faculty about discussions are, is it a yes, no question, which Liz covered? Is it a vocabulary question? And I see discussion posts like that, like, describe classroom management. Well, that's a word I could look up and I can post a description. Instead, I'm a big fan of compare and contrast, current events, personal experience type questions. Name a time you were in a classroom that you felt like the classroom management went off the rails, or name a time when you were in a class when the classroom management was really well done. And actually, I think was it this one? I think when I looked at this. So here's an example of a great discussion. What might you try not try in your own classroom? What specific routines and transitions were in place in your practicum classroom? So this is asking students to provide what they've experienced. What new strategies have you learned? And this has lots of videos to watch. So this is providing a lot of content for them to review, and then some really thoughtful questions to ask, and not just, what is a seating arrangement? That's a vocabulary question. So this is a good example of, what to look for, what to ask questions about, how to connect it to your own learning, how to connect it to your own experience. That's why this is a great example of a discussion post. Any other questions? Or anything else you'd like me to touch on, Liz?
I don't think so, but that was really useful. Very thoughtful.
Okay.
Anything else, anybody? All right, then we'll wrap this up. Everybody have a great day.
All right.
Thank you.
See ya.
Great job, ladies.